Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Barry. Excited for
Adele.
this week?
Yes, we've been getting ready for this last week, so this is definitely good to hear now.
Exactly. So last week we were talking about, forgiveness. So this is part two. Last week we talked about, forgiveness of others when we feel that everything from minor indiscretions to really some pretty devastating experiences, as extreme as murder and rape or things like that are pretty hard to forgive somebody else for, and everything in between. But
Right.
but we also kept referring to this week, the talk we're going to give this week, because a big component of forgiveness is self-forgiveness. And Barry and I both come from the University of Santa Monica, where we studied spiritual psychology, masters in spiritual psychology. And one of the key components we learned there was forgiveness of self and others. And initially people go, what do you mean forgive myself? I don't do anything wrong. They did something wrong. So we're going to delve into that this week and talk about, again, keeping in mind we're not, that there are some transgressions that are minor and some that are really, really huge. So we're just doing a big, broad brushstroke here. But again, the things that we're going to discuss can be very, very helpful for people who are in that position of struggling with wanting to forgive another person, or and the self-forgiveness is a key component to that. So why don't you kick us off, Barry?
Sure. Well, a couple of quick things to bring us up as well. This thing about having the recognition about how some things are minor, some things are major, is if you're looking to experience and explore forgiveness, I highly recommend, we both do, that you start with the small stuff because it's easy to get success with. Because if it's the biggest thing in your life that you're having an issue with, it may be the most challenging one to try and forgive off the bat. So it's a good thing to get some practice of using forgiveness in your life on the less than major stuff. The finding for a parking spot, or the kid that threw stuff at the wall. The little things that happen, they're just part of life, not the big stuff. Save those for later on when you've got more facility with the skill of forgiveness. So that's one thing. The second thing is, though, again, last week we talked about forgiving others. And the recommendation, again, as I said, for a recap, is that we are forgiving ourselves about others anyway. So it's not so much when she's forgiven and let them off the hook. We let ourselves off the hook about what we're holding against the other person. And in this week, we're going to dive in much more deeper into that self-relationship piece about how do you forgive yourself for things that we've basically been carrying around for maybe months, maybe years. So this is worth listening to.
Yeah, I love that. That is so funny. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I'm like, give me the big stuff. I want to get rid of the big stuff. I let go of the person snuck in and took my parking space stuff very easily. It's the big stuff.
Yeah, but let's be clear. You've had some practice with this skill now.
Well, I'm also, it's like it is the big stuff that can hold us back, especially if we've gone through any childhood trauma or abandonment, abuse, neglect, things like that. That I certainly identify with. That stuff can affect how we show up in life every minute of every day. So that is the stuff that ultimately, as I love what Barry suggested, let's start with the small stuff, but ultimately we want to get to the big stuff, because the big stuff is what is preventing us from living the life we want to live. And, this lifetime, we're only here once. I do believe in many lifetimes, but in this one, we want to make the most of why we're here and what we're meant to do, and not to be hindered by past pain and suffering. So why don't you start us off, Barry, with the self-forgiveness?
Well, let me start with this piece. And it's actually what you said just inspired me to think about this, because yes, I'm also in the same belief that we do have many lifetimes on this around this physical world in sequence, not at the same time.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, some people think, well,
we don't know.
I did hear a story once about somebody said one of the ideas they talked about, one of the biblical studies, or no, one of the Buddhist teachings, was about understanding that if you imagine that every single person on the planet is you've lived their life at some point.
Mm.
So we've each of us have been in everybody else's lives 8 billion times. That's a lot of stuff to think about. So putting back into this topic here about living sequentially is that if you knew that you're going to be coming back for another lifetime, another experience, another part of time, would you want to come in clean or with baggage? Because what we're talking about here is that you're getting the opportunity by working with self-forgiveness and making peace with those parts inside, is that you basically, it's like going through the car wash, you're cleaning everything off. So when you come out the other side of it, you're clean and fresh again. And it's better than, you know, they talk about how people, the greatest fear of the dying is of not having loved enough, not having contributed enough. I believe part of it also is not having forgiven enough, not having made peace enough, because the regrets that we carry, and for people listening to this, you may have memories of something that happened 25, 30 years ago you haven't let go of yet. So you know what it feels like to drag that baggage, that weight of judgment into the world every single day. When you get up in the morning and feel tired already, this is part of that. So when we do this work, I'm passionate about people really making peace with what happened before, because their lives get much better. They're healthier and happier because of this work. So that's why I'm passionate about this.
And I was just sharing that, Brian, thinking about, because this week we are focusing on forgiveness of selves, and
Hmm.
so many of us have been brought up to be perfectionists, to not embrace our humanity and our human frailties. So we
Hmm.
we beat ourselves up and judge ourselves, and not just other people, but to the degree that is so horrendous. And that's the baggage we're talking about this week. That what we do to ourselves, where we've judged ourselves, where we've judged ourselves for judging other people or whatever it is, but that self-judgment, that expectation that as a spiritual being having a human experience, we should be perfect. No, we came down
Right.
to this physical world to be human, to fall flat on our faces, to try things, to learn from our veering off course. I wouldn't even call them mistakes, but life
Yeah.
gives us feedback. We veered off course a bit, and it's like, oh, whoops, that doesn't feel so good. Let me move left a bit here, and oops, went left too much, and now I'm coming back to center again. And it's just a series of doing, and to learn self forgiveness along the way releases us, as Barry said, from that baggage that's just clogging up our lives, tainting the way we look at life and the way we look at ourselves.
Hmm.
I'd like Barry to share with us that. I mean, you can set it up, but the practice we learned at USM, I think this is a
Sure.
really great tool that I certainly have continued to use over the years. I mean, gosh, now it's almost 17,
I
18
even have,
years since I learned
I
it.
even have, I was saying, I even have a chapter in my book about this piece. So definitely, I do use this skill a lot, and I refer to USM as being the teacher of this.
Mhm.
But you say things that give me more things to say. So before I say that, let me say this piece, because you said something about veering off course, and it reminded me of the fact that, for a start, um, the Catholic faith has provided many people the opportunity to feel like they've done wrong, because basically the teaching of the Catholic faith is you're born into sin, original sin, that sort of thing. Now, I'm Jewish, so I may get it wrong, just to be clear. but the premise of religion teaching us that we're already in the wrong before we start is kind of hamstringing us. It's like we get stuck in that. So the thing about forgiveness is that it really is a chance to look back at what we believe to be the truth and realizing it wasn't, and then forgiving yourself for thinking it was. Because the thing about this self-judgment, one thing that hit me is like, we forgive ourselves for judging ourselves, and then we have to forgive ourselves for judging that we're forgiving ourselves for judging ourselves. It's this compounding thing, because we keep thinking that there's no way out. And so I want to make this point very clear before going into the mechanics of this: is self-forgiveness is the way out. There's and I reference this book. I've talked about this before in previous episodes, I think, but in a book by Richard Buck, one of my favorite authors, he wrote a book called Running from Safety. He talks about the premise of self-forgiveness in relation to his inner child. And one of the key metaphors that he uses is that basically when he meets his inner child is in this prison cell, this cage, this trap. And every time he goes back to visit him, he's in this trap. And then one day he goes to visit, and the door's open and the kid's gone. And he goes looking for the kid, and the kid says, "Well, I realized after all is that the key was on the inside.
Mhm.
That I'd imprisoned myself because of the judgments I carried and the blame I carried and all the upset. So when I gave myself self-forgiveness, and I know I'm paraphrasing this completely, but understanding is when you do the self-forgiveness, it's like letting yourself out of the prison. You put yourself in. Nobody else did.
Mm,
So this is simple stuff, but the power is profound.
yeah.
So to get into the mechanics of this, unless you have something to add to that before I go there.
No, no, I love what you just said because it is so true. We really do. We imprison ourselves,
Yeah.
and the self forgiveness is the key to us just turning that lock and walking out.
Mhm.
So
Right.
eager to hear how you share it, Barry. So
Well, the thing about forgiveness, the mechanics of it are very straightforward, but the energy of it's very different. So let me just set it up this way, because I learned after I went through University of Santa Monica and this process, I found some things that made it even more potent for me. So one of the things is that first, and we talked about this in previous episodes about venting, getting the upset out, and writing things out. So my quote multiple step process starts with, if you're upset about something, you write it out, you vent it out, you express it, you get it freed up. Because what we do by releasing the pressure, like taking the pressure valve off a pressure cooker, is you let the steam out, you let the pressure off. And when you do that, what happens, or tends to happen, is you start to find levels of compassion show up. You find yourself having care and compassion for yourself, because forgiveness has this wonderful gift that you can say it and nothing happens. But when you feel it, everything happens.
yeah,
So the idea for me with forgiveness is that forgiveness is fueled by compassion, self-compassion. So when we have something happen to us, somebody does something, or we do something wrong, we make a mistake, like we prang the car, or something else happens, and we get upset. We've been carrying around this upset for ourselves that's not getting a result. So first of all, it's okay, and this is a key step, to vent it out. Where I used freeform writing, which again USM taught me this too, to write things out that you then burn and destroy at the end. But by writing it out, you are releasing the pressure, the pain, the upset, the wounding. And when you do that, then again, compassion becomes more present because you start realizing how much you care about what you did and why you did it. When you come from a place of compassion, the steps of forgiveness, which again are fairly simple, carry a lot more weight and they can become easier. So the idea being with forgiveness for self, and we may go back and talk about others in another moment about how this works for them too, is you start with recognizing that we carry this sense of judgment. So the thing about judgment is it's a it's a mental belief or a mental thought that carries emotional weight. So the compassion becomes the counterweight to the emotional baggage. But then you're changing the wiring inside by saying, I forgive myself for judging myself for having done something. And the key thing is you're forgiving yourself for judging. You're not forgiving yourself for what happened. You're forgiving yourself for judging, because the judgment is as I said last week about the wedge, it's the weight you carry that separates you from the love from other people. So by going through the steps of forgiveness, of forgiving yourself whatever comes up, and you might discover when you're doing this, that when you forgive yourself for the judgment of A, you might discover there's judgment B and judgment C and judgment D, and you basically keep going through all of these until the forgivenesses start to disappear and dissipate, and you start discovering how free you feel. Now, this is again, I've written about this in my book. I know that you do the same work, Dallas, in your work too. This is the um, Cliff Notes version of it. I want to make sure you get this understanding. So that's the step. And at the end of it, what you discover at the end is you start feeling a lot freer. And again, back to the lightness and freedom we talked about last week and this week. The forgiveness is an alleviation or a release of the pressure that you carried inside.
yeah, yeah. You know what I want to add here, Barry, is often we blame ourselves. So I'm thinking of when we were children, and
Yes.
and that's somewhere where some of this thinking originated.
Hmm.
As children that grow up in dysfunctional environments or painful environments, it's often easier for us to blame ourselves than it is to blame our parents, because especially as a very young child, we know that we cannot survive without our parents. So we would rather make ourselves wrong than make our parents wrong. Because who wants to face the reality that our parents might actually not be very good parents? They
Right.
actually might be doing things that are harmful to us. So we'd
Yep.
rather blame ourselves. And there's two reasons for that. As I say, it's easier to then go into denial and feel safe with parents that are actually not safe. And secondly, it also, if we are taking responsibility and blaming ourselves, we actually then believe that there's a chance that if we change ourselves, then we can change the outcome. It gives us more
Right.
of a sense of control. So I just want to mention those two things because, again, when we are doing this practice of forgiving ourselves for judging ourselves, it sometimes helps to understand that we formed these judgments to actually protect ourselves as a young child.
Yes.
They had a function. And as a young child, they worked perfectly. We needed
Hmm.
that denial. We needed it as a survival mechanism. What happens is when we carry that judgment, I'll use an example for myself. When I was a child and my father never acknowledged me, and I would pass him in the street and I would just like stare at him and hoping our eyes would meet, hoping that would be the moment where he'd go, "Oh my God, I love you, my little girl." Never happened. But I
Hmm.
would then go on in my head to go, the reason he's not doing this is because I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough and clever enough, sweet enough, kind enough, blah, 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 all the enoughs. And I never questioned that. I carried that throughout my life. I mean, you think around my 20s, I'd turn around and go, hang on a minute, it's never a child's fault that a parent abandons them. It's the parent's choice. But I seriously, I lived with that feeling. It was so embedded in me that I just never questioned it. And it was always, well, I just wasn't good enough. But obviously, I wasn't good enough because he would have wanted me. And but what happens is if we don't do this type of work, go inside and go, I forgive myself for judging myself as not good enough. I forgive myself for judging myself as less than or whatever it is. And but understanding, as I say, it's not just like a mantra of I forgive myself for judging myself. But when we really also have that piece underneath, which is this saved my life as a child. This helped me not absorb that whole impact of being abandoned and very scared in the world. This helped me
Hmm.
survive. It's easier to go into these judgments, to see that they were formulated from a very innocent place and formulated by the ego to protect, life and death situations, and to forgive from that place, as you said, that compassion. And I love what you said too. Yes, free form writing. Oh my God, that is a lifesaver. This is where we learn not to we become responsive, not reactive, is by free form writing, allowing
Okay.
ourselves to get those emotions out, to hit those pockets of compassion of, and because we always know underneath anger and pain, is pain and
Hmm.
suffering. Anger is just a protective ego response to protect us.
Outward expression. Yeah.
So, so yeah,
Yeah. So reiterating that this thing is so just to sketch it out, to mark it out. So anger is often the outward expression of those pain and wounds we have inside because we're retaliating from the wounding and hurting inside as a way of protecting ourselves.
mhm,
So anger isn't necessarily, sometimes it is, but not necessarily vindictive. It's actually just expression to protect.
yeah,
Underneath that, yes, is pain and wounding, but underneath the pain and wounding is because we have tenderness and we have compassion, we have love that's been impacted somehow.
mhm,
So again, the forgiveness work, because it's done with compassion, is almost a way of reinforcing the love we have for ourselves, and it gives us more power in that vulnerability and in that compassion for ourselves that we may not have had before. And I want to go back just to reiterate what you said and underscore it again, that some of these things we carried from very young age when we didn't know better. The thing is that as humans, we tend to do better when we know better most of the time.
oh,
But
right,
when we're very young, we don't.
mm,
And the problem is because when we're very young, those patterns, those ways of doing things, those defenses, those judgments go under the radar because they become unconscious, they become automatic. As an adult, we may know better, but we don't realize we're not doing better because we don't recognize what we're doing by autopilot.
mhm,
And so, and that's always in my work a lot about how we tend to attract relationships that mirror back to us. And I think we talked about this before in previous episodes, that when we go back and look at the relationships we've had, oftentimes they reflect back to us how we thought as a youngster. And so this forgiveness work as well, it might just change your relationship paradigms too, because you're starting to let go of those judgments or those belief systems that have been running the shop automatically for many, many years.
yeah,
So this is really worth doing.
absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking back to a few incidents in my life. I was thinking about, and some of this might be a bit. What's the expression? TMA. Too much information for some people. TMI. Sorry.
TMI. Yeah, TMI.
Um, but but being well, basically raped at a very young age, and blaming yourself. This is not uncommon for a rape victim to blame ourselves. And again, I think it's just an ego defense. It's almost too painful to think that 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 something like that could happen to us. That if we take some responsibility, the world isn't such a scary place. I don't know what psychologically goes on, but it took me years to
Hmm.
get to the place of being able to say, nope, very young teenage girl was not responsible for a much older man's actions. Certainly, doesn't matter what they say to you, never ever was it okay.
Hmm.
But again, and I'm putting that out there because I know so many rape victims do blame themselves. I was in the wrong place. Our eyes met. I was wearing the wrong thing. I had too much to drink. Whatever it is, there's this tendency to go into self blame, and and again, this is such a key component for something
Hmm.
like that, to have compassion for yourself, for not forgetting yourself in that situation, but for having judged yourself for what
Oh
happened
yeah,
to you. That's so
yeah,
important. As I said, it,
yeah.
it took years of therapy for me to actually stop blaming myself. And as I said, clearly now at 64, I can look back and think, no, no, absolutely not. And there are other instances where I was, taken advantage of in a situation should never have happened,
Well,
i.e., in therapy or in a
yeah,
religious community or something like that. So, again, it's so important to do this step of self forgiveness for judging yourself as having asked for it or made it happen or whatever. This is a huge part of that ability to move on and let
it's
go.
it's definitely something that I think it's more true for people who have hearts and care, because some people don't care, they don't give a flying whatever it is about what happened. But when you care, it's like we have this tendency to be over responsible.
Hmm.
We tend to start taking on more responsibility for an action, like you were saying. When a young kid is abused or hurt by an older person, they start to doubt and devalue their own worth, their own belief system about themselves, because somehow they think they made it happen. Especially if the older person, the other older adult, convinces them of that, just
Yeah,
adding more fuel to the fire.
well,
So
100%, which they do. It's your fault. You should have looked at me in that way. You did, you asked for it. Yes, we
you weren't
hear all the.
provocative. Exactly, totally. Those things. So the thing about this work, and this is why I want to make sure to get this thing is, I'm going to keep hammering this point home, is because we have this sensitivity to feeling like somehow we can't shed the blame, because if we do, somehow we make the other person wrong, who we put on a pedestal type thing. Because
Yeah.
and here's the clarity, as you were saying, that person doesn't deserve to be on the pedestal. Nobody does, frankly. That's another conversation entirely. But by recognizing that what we're doing isn't about them in the first place,
Hmm.
it's all about us.
Hmm.
It is way past time for most of us to bring a little care, compassion, and forgiveness to ourselves, because we've been carrying this baggage, this weight of hurt and wounded feelings and self judgment for many, many years. It's way past its due date. So it's time to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's like I said, it's not denying that something really painful may have happened to us, or somebody else's actions really hurt us. It's not denying that at all, but it's not picking up that weapon that was used against us and carrying it and using it to beat ourselves up as we continue
Right.
life. I mean, that's the part where we're innocently um, becoming our own perpetrators, and
Hmm.
and that is so incredibly painful. The other thing,
Well,
sorry, you go back.
say, underscoring that point, it's like the self-flagellation. I'd say to my clients oftentimes, like, how long do you want to keep beating yourself up for? Because that's what we're doing. We're beating ourselves up. Nobody else is.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
and
Sorry, back to you.
and often what we also do is when we are, when the subconscious is doing that, we often, and again, this is not blaming the victim at all, but when we haven't done this work, we will often, we emit this energy, these signals. We will often sort of attract the same situation again, the same
Hmm.
violation, a same injury, a same wound, because the world, the universe is really trying to have us heal from this. It's trying to bring it into our awareness. So unless we do this work, we might find ourselves repeatedly in these patterns of being violated, of being abused, of being, victimized. And until we really stand up and see it for what it was and do this forgiveness, and it's the same thing, it's the forgiveness of others and of ourselves, We
Hmm.
have to do both ends. Last week we did it. That people didn't hear last week. These are two sides of the same coin. They're both
Yes.
integral to letting this pattern go. And when you do that work, we've got it's like, thank you, universe. I've got the message, and I've done the self forgiveness and the forgiveness of others. I don't need the lesson again. I've got it
Hmm.
clearly. We can let this one go. The freedom that
Absolutely.
comes from that is incredible. And again, it brings us into, we talked about this last week, it brings us into the present moment. It has us be the architects of our own life moving forward. We're not victims of past events or past suffering. We are clear, free of it. And we have all this energy, and it just opens up our world to us.
In fact, to underscore that point, it's some people have looked at forgiveness as being some sort of wimpy thing, some sort of weak thing. And I would counter that by saying that when people do self forgiveness, their posture changes. The way they carry themselves changes. Their presence and energy in the world, their visibility, their light in the world, how they're seen changes. Because again, you're not if you're dragging around a heavy suitcase, you're gonna look. Your shoulders gonna slump. You're gonna feel down. You're gonna look down. That's how people are when they do a lot of self judgment and carry that blame on themselves. But when they do the forgiveness work and they really are honestly opening up that space and letting go of the baggage, they stand differently. People look happier, healthier. So basically, if you little plug, if you're single and you want a healthy relationship, if you do this work, you'll be more attractive. So this work is so useful. That's
Yeah.
why I say do it. You know.
And the other thing is, when we don't clear up the past, and with these forgivenesses, we often, I was in a situation a week ago, a couple of weeks ago, where somebody clearly hadn't done some work. And
Mhm.
obviously they were suffering. It was very clear that there had been some original wound, and they hadn't done the work, and they were projecting, and their anger was so intense. It was coming out sideways. It was coming out to
Yeah.
a few different people, myself
Mhm.
included. And I wasn't reactive, because I number one had compassion, because I could see it was so way beyond me or these other people. I could see that there was some anger that had not been dealt with and processed in a healthy way. Um, but I had compassion, because I felt like, oh my God, this person, until they do that, until they acknowledge and do the forgiveness of self and others, they are going to constantly find themselves in environments, in groups, where they are going to look for people to perceive an injury, to allow them to attack, to get this
Yeah.
rage and anger out. And I could see it happening, and other people saw it too. It wasn't just me. They saw that this reaction was way out of proportion for the actual what was happening at that moment. Um, but I really did have compassion for them. I thought, oh my gosh, that must be so, and again, compassion for myself. I've been there. I know what that feels like. I know where when you are when you've shoved things so down so deep, you have no awareness. Your unconscious is running the show. That wounded child is looking for situations, looking to be wounded, looking to for an opportunity to unleash. And yeah, it's I mean that person was completely trapped within a prison,
Yeah.
and their life was miserable.
It's almost like you have to not have to, but you can have compassion for them because you realize how trapped they are.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then, and then you get to walk. And the thing is, that's the thing. You get to walk away clear.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know, and that is one of the gifts. It is a part of awareness, and that's one of the gifts of this work. Is when you've done the inner work, you don't get hooked in so easily, and so you get to look at the other person, see the trap they put themselves into,
Hmm.
and obviously, if you want to offer your services, you can. But ultimately, you can actually turn around and walk away and leave everything behind you. It's nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
That's a powerful way to live.
Yeah, and this is actually a little tease for our next show, because and there was a gift in it. There was a gift in it. Her
Yes.
her anger, as much as in the moment I was thinking, "Woo, I'm not comfortable with this anger. Take it back. Deal with it wherever it's meant to go, in whatever." But afterwards, even though I knew it wasn't justified coming at me, I was also able to see the gift in that. So that's
Yeah.
what it's a tease for our next show, because that's our next show is. when there are situations where it looks like, whoa, where did that come from? Or I didn't deserve that, or whatever, that no matter what happens to us in life, there is a gift. And that
Yeah.
is another level of freedom. Talk about the freedom from self forgiveness. When
Hmm.
we are able to look at all life events as for us, not against us,
Oh yeah.
then that is ultimate freedom. So I can't wait for our next show where we talk about that. Life is
That's
for us, not against us.
absolutely. So one little thing I was going to mention for those anybody listening who or watching who heard me talk about the forgiveness piece and doesn't get it yet, wants to have access to it. I did create a PDF that was part of my for my book audience. They can get if they go to my book and want to get the forgiveness work there. But if you want to reach out and get that, if you want to reach out to me to get that for yourself, just send me an email or contact me, and I'll send you the PDF for free,
Yeah,
just a gift. Because the thing is, the process again, because it's not mine, it came from USM. I've just tweaked it a little bit, but I value this work so much. I'll give that away to somebody who wants it. So reach
absolutely.
out.
Great. And yes, as Barry said, both of us use this in our work, and it's an integral part of not just of our work, but our ongoing growth and consciousness. So thank you,
Yes,
everybody. Thank
wonderful stuff.
you.
So thank you for joining us.
All right, we will see you next week. Remember, everything is for us, not against us. It's going to be a good one.
Tease for next week. See you next week. Take care.
All right, great. Same for you, Barry. Have a great week. Bye bye.
Bye. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.